Hey, Miss Cindy, I believe, is wanting Miss Jean to start talking.
Yep,
Okay, Miss Jean.
over to you.
Where does she want me to start? I have been going through things. Actually, I watched the documentary again this morning.
You
Oh, did
Uh,
start.
you?
You start anywhere you want to, Miss Jean.
okay, it's obvious that. Give me a minute. It's obvious that this was a frame job. As far as I'm concerned, they never considered anyone else. I was told by the maintenance worker who worked there at the time. The lead investigator who started out asked Matt Doran to investigate further, and he said he wasn't going to do that. He was going to have Guy Heinze for this. This was before Guy was ever arrested. Um, of course, they kept him, they isolated him, they never let him out until the charade where he got out. They let him out, but we went through this whole charade where he was going to have a bond hearing. Stephen Kelly, who was the DA at the time, the Glenn County detective, and I don't remember his name, but I know he was Reuben Knight's son-in-law. And the reason they made a point of telling me that he was the hospital administrator at one time where I worked,
Oh,
and who was Guy's attorney initially. And I asked Stephen Kelly if they were thinking Guy was guilty, and his comment to me was, uh, they gave him a pretty hard time, but he had done everything he could to anger the police. That was the first issue. He stated if you looked at it one way, you'd think he was guilty, and if you looked at it another way, you'd say he wasn't. But while we were in the room, they they were talking about bond and what they could set. I had property in the county at that time. They came up with a statement that it wouldn't do any good to set a bond if my property was not worth that. So they called to find out what the bond was so they could set the bond. And of course, Tyler and me, and they called the alarm company. He was to wear a bracelet and he was to go into certain areas and go to Narcotics Anonymous and all this stuff. He had to go, I forget how many times a week. But he was to be restrained to a certain area. And they were waiting for the uh, ankle bracelet monitor, what have you, to come. On the phone while I was in there, they called the Providence, which was the alarm. They were going to have a monitor over there the next day. Well, it wasn't there. We were told that the alarm company didn't have one that would have to come from the West Coast, and that would take about a week. So the attorney at the time told him he would have it to pay over, have them. He would pay for it to be overnighted, but then they said they probably couldn't get in touch with the company. So the attorney told me to go over and sign the bond and talk to Sheriff Wayne Bennett was the sheriff at the time. He told me I couldn't sign the bond until the ankle monitor was there because it would look like they were not doing their job. So he sent me to the undersheriff, who was Ron Corbett, to complete paperwork except for signing. But then when I talked to Ron Corbett, he told me that couldn't be done. So on the 4th, he was, this incident happened on August the 28th, 2009. So on September the 4th, the monitor got there. Tyler called and told me that it was here. I needed to go sign the bond and call the attorney. So as I was leaving to go to the office called me and told me I needed to take care of the bond and God needed some clothes to wear. So I talked to Harrison and he told me to go sign the bond. Tyler was getting the clothes. So Tyler paid the money. Receipt was written on a yellow legal pad. They didn't even have an official receipt. We waited quite some time for God to be released. When we left, I stopped at the Jiffy store to forgot to buy some cigarettes. It was directly on the way to the house. And as just before we got to the house, somebody asked him over the monitor, I'm assuming it was one of the cops, what he was doing out of his area. And guy told him he was on the way home and had not gotten there yet. So after we got home, the officers knocked on the door and demanded guy come to the door and turn around, and put his hands behind his back. And of course, I asked them what was going on, and they told me they didn't know that the judge had revoked the bond, and I would have to call his attorney for any information. Well, they held Guy in handcuffs for quite some time out by the road, and the yard was fenced in, which I was in the yard, and I went out there. They informed me that I better not go out that yard. They had guns trained on all of us. He had to stand in that road for some time waiting for somebody to come take him to jail. So as they followed us home, if they intended to arrest him, which they knew they did, why didn't they just have somebody to come with them to take him back to jail? Why could not one of them take him back unless it was for show? The way I found out he was being charged with the homicides was somebody, a friend, called me and told me it was all over the internet that guy was being charged and a conference were being held at 9 o'clock that night. So Matt Doran had said to everybody that he was positive guy had done this. He had positive guy had done it by himself. But then they started discussing two pieces of evidence. Well, during the press conference, one of the reporters asked, did they have the two pieces of evidence before they let him go and followed him home? Or did they get the two pieces of evidence while he was out? And Doran absolutely like he was poleaxed. He didn't know what to say. And the reporter stated, well, we know you did because we were there. So after he was rearrested, there was a rumor he was charged because of something they heard on tape while he was out, but nothing was ever said about that again. Some of this might seem a little not in order to you all. If you have any questions, you can always ask. One of the things that John B. Johnson said, this was the state district attorney who was assisting Jackie Johnson attorney, because this was shortly after she became the district attorney, or something was said she didn't have enough experience to try a case of this magnitude. But when the forensic investigators stated they should have further evidence, John B. Johnson, the state district attorney, stated that when you find your keys, you don't have to look any further. Well, this to me is a very arrogant statement. Everybody knows what their keys look like, but most people, I have keys laying around my house that I have no idea what they go to. And if I want to use those keys, I got to figure out which lock they go to. And some I never have found out, so they went in the trash. But that just is an arrogant, stupid question to me. But he was a grandstander. Uh, he made a lot of comments there. Nobody's DNA, this was his opening statement, nobody's DNA was in that house but Guy's. Nobody. And he named several counties in that whole district, all the counties. But Guy lived there. Why wouldn't his DNA be in that trailer? It makes sense that Guy's DNA would be in that trailer. And during this case, they changed the attorneys several times. The judge was changed one time. Investigators were changed several times. Most of the people who did not live in Glenn County was taken off that case. Another thing that I think was wrong, Matt Doran's wife was the secretary for Judge Scarlett. In my opinion, no chief of police wife should work with a judge who is trying criminal cases. but that's just my opinion. I think that is illegal. They claimed that the family knew about it, but the family did not know about it. That was said in a later hearing that we had. Um, Also, John B. Johnson, every person who worked with him said they did not like him working with him because he was known for withholding evidence. I know that he was investigated 2 or 3 times for this same thing, but he always got away with it. That I don't quite understand, but then by the same token, Matt Doran always explained everything away that happened wrong in that police department. One of John B. Johnson's statements was that trailer was a hog pen, and nobody could go through that trailer in the dark but Guy. Well, he don't know whether the lights were on or off. I suspect they had some kind of light. They had to see where the people were, but this was just one of his statements. Uh, the blood on the undershorts they were talking about, complaining about 3 people's blood being on these shorts. This was not blood spatter. This was a smear. They had taken Guy to jail, left his clothes, put them all in one bag, and then they went back later to get the clothes. They did not even take the clothes when they took him to jail. The blood on those shorts had 3 people's blood in one spot and nothing else. And it looked smeared. It was not spatter. So, what is the chances of 3 people's blood getting one spot on a pair of shorts unless it was planted? That is my thought.
The clothes were held in a car, weren't they, for 24 hours? Is that right?
I'm not exactly sure how long the clothes were in the car. Some other stuff I know was left in the car. I'm not sure about the clothes. I did not run across that this morning when I was going through my stuff.
Yeah.
But I know they left the clothes there. I know it was brought out. They had the person who took the clothes on the stand, and they were all placed in one bag, and they were placed in evidence at the detention center. However, in 2 or 3 days, when they went back to get them, is when they went to take Guy's clothes and do swabs and collect DNA and all that stuff. Um, During the trial, he made a big deal about Joe West's pocket being pulled out, and he claimed that Guy took the money from Joe West's pocket because Guy had money in his pocket. Well, Guy had been paid that day, and he had spent some of his money. I think he had somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 in his pocket. But the DA was claiming that um, that was because he stole Joe's money. Yet Rusty Jr. had money left in his pocket. So if you're going to take one person's money, why not take the other? This whole thing just makes no sense. One of their big witnesses was Parker, and I don't know if everybody has seen this documentary or not. If you haven't, it probably doesn't make sense to you. But one of the things that was brought out, Parker was their witness, and he claimed that Guy told him, excuse me, he was Guy's supervisors, told him that his daddy had never done anything for them. He was going to give Joe money for a boat, shrimp boat, Rusty money for a trailer, and he's never done anything for me and my brother. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill them all. Well, this was supposedly in July or August of 2009. However, I didn't work there after September 2008. John B. Johnson's remark about that. Oh, Parker was a year off. Oh, so to me, that's a big deal. If you're trying to take somebody's life, being a year off is definitely important. But it was brought out that Parker never went to the police until about a year after the crime happened with this information. So that makes no sense either. I got to flip my pages. There were many tips, a lot of them not investigated. One officer testified about a tip from Calvin Hudson that someone named Dwayne was heard arguing with Russell Jr. and said, "We'll come back and kill your whole family." They didn't follow up because they didn't have a last name, but it was brought out that Dwayne lived 5 doors down in that trailer park. What else I wanted to look at? They found a piece of paper in there that they claimed had Guy's bloody fingerprint on it, which Johnson tried to say it was found in a drawer and he had to be in there. He had to put it there. But then the other investigator that testified said he didn't see where the paper came from. He don't know if it was in the drawer or not. However, the investigator who actually found the paper was not even in court to testify. So that makes no sense. They did not test nail scrapings. They did not test hair in victims' hands. There was a palm print, a complete handprint on a headboard of the bed that they sent and told them to test for Guy Heinze. If it was not Guy Heinze, do not test for anybody else. That makes no sense. Prints were found on Russell Jr.'s body and on his legs where it looked like somebody had. However, those were not tested. Michelle's phone that they never tried to check until about a year later. They charged up that phone and tried to test those. And I think we went over what time the calls were made. There was 2 calls made from her phone and a call made from that they didn't bother concerning themselves and checking out. And one of the big things was they said Guy had to be guilty. This was Johnson again. Guy had to be guilty because he said they were beat to death in the 911 call. Well, and the police thought they were shot. Well, nobody, in my opinion, could look at these wounds and think people had been shot. However, I think that was just they were saying what Matt Doran wanted them to say, is what I think. It was obvious they were not shot. There was blood found in the bathroom that nobody was in. They took pictures of it, yet it was never tested. They had blood in the drains, but that was never tested in that same bathroom. And when it was said something about not taking the test and everything, well, Darius, who was the lead investigator at the time all this went on, after the second lead investigator, and he was the one testifying in court, and he was the one testifying before the grand jury. He said, we just couldn't send the whole trailer. We had to pick and choose what was important. Well, what is not important about blood found somewhere in a room where no victims are in a murder scene, especially when there's several people murdered? That makes absolutely no sense. I'm trying to get, and several of the interviews was missing. Big Joe Anderson said his cousin had information about this, who had done this. They interviewed Big Joe Anderson, but that interview just disappeared. Several things disappeared. It was pointed out, and Darius said the reason, which I don't think he should have been allowed to say. I think Newell should have protested saying this. The reason Guy went to the house is he was going to steal the Darva set, and Russell Toller Sr. caught him, and he was fighting him to get the dog set. And then after he killed him, he had to kill everybody else in the house to keep from being caught. However, there were pills laying on that counter. They had crime scene photos, so obviously the pills still there. I'm looking at several things.
Go ahead, take your time.
And Orlinsky testified that guy was very upset, gagging and vomiting after he discovered these people. Um, they also found nunchucks there. It was later, after all the crime scene had been investigated, they found nunchucks, looked like homemade nunchucks. They had, apparently it was like hollow pipe, and said one had weight stuck down in it and hair, a piece of paper stuck down in it and some hair, and it looked like blood on the paper. Um, these disappeared. Nobody. They claimed they were asked about them. The lady who was over the trailer park called them and reported them. So Mike Owens, they claimed they didn't have any, and then they found a phone call where where she had talked to Mike Owens about the nunchucks. Well, he sent somebody to get them, but he said he couldn't remember who he sent, and she didn't remember. She just took the card and she put the card that he gave her in the file at the trailer park. Well, when they went to the trailer park to try to find the card that she had been given as to who came and picked it up, it was not to be found, and they were told to leave the trailer park or they were going to be arrested. So that again is strange. During some of the hearings and I went to every hearing with the exception of one, and I think that was the first one they had. One of the hearings, the the DA did not want the notes preserved that the investigating officers or the testing people kept. And at another hearing, the prosecution didn't want the defense to view the police files. Um, Johnson did not want Doran questioned by the judge. Matt Doran was subpoenaed at one time, and he was supposed to have the tape of the interview that his officers made, but Johnson told him he didn't have to bring it. However, the judge did tell him to look for the tape. And then he claimed he didn't know that there was a tape made. So all of this makes no sense. But in looking at the documentary this morning, juror number 3, they just threw them in there. And they didn't tell them what they were supposed to be in there for. It makes no sense. If you're going to be judging somebody, whether they live or die, you need to know what you're doing in there. The remark why they wanted us so bad, that makes sense. Matt Doran continuously said he was absolutely certain what happened. He was absolutely certain how it happened. He was absolutely certain Guy did it alone. And he was still convinced that Guy did it alone. But the jury had to decide that. I think the jury actually, I don't know if it was because Matt Doran attended the court every day, had his little notepad making his little notes. However, that was one thing I questioned, and everybody I questioned who was familiar with the court there said he never attended the murder trials. This was his first one, but he was there every single day. And Stalvey was the police officer on the scene. He said as he made his way through the house, it appeared that everyone had been shot. That was his first take on it. And that was the big thing that Johnson said Guy had to be the one did it because he said he's the only one that knew they were beat to death. Well, looking at the photos of the victims during the hearing, it's obvious that they were beat. Nobody in their right mind would think they were shot. Um, they found the shotgun stock at Russell Sr.'s head, but the barrel was used to kill everyone. You can at least argue that, is what Johnson said. Um, Donahue did all the autopsies. They all had multiple injuries. 138, 148, 136, and Guy's daddy had 22 external and 17 internal. Apparently, his head was beat to a pulp. And when they asked Guy in his interview, how did he know they were beat to death? One of the guys who interviewed him, he said because he saw his daddy and his head was messed up, it didn't even look like him. And there again, nobody in their right mind would think he was shot. They were upset because Guy did not look at all the pictures. One of the jurors said she wished he'd paid attention. And 32 said he just hung his head down and grinned a little bit. And I don't know whether this guy was paid off, but this guy considered him guilty. I am not convinced that they did not stack this jury some kind of way. It was obvious that he considered Guy guilty before he ever got in. And one of the things that they all said in jury selection was they would listen to what they heard in the courtroom and they would base their verdict on that and nothing else. Yet they had multiple police officers that was in that group. There were quite a number of people in this group. I don't remember how many that they were questioning. And every one of them said they would side with the police no matter what they heard in that courtroom. Well, I myself used to be one of those people. I always thought if somebody was arrested, they were guilty, they had to have evidence to arrest them. However, I found out this is not the case. I found out that from the attorneys, the police are allowed to lie to people to try to make them confess, and apparently that is something they're very good at. They tried to get Guy to confess. They even told my son that they had Guy on tape saying that he had taken them over there, which he cussed them out. They were liars. But that's all right for them to lie, but you are not supposed to. Um, they were. He spent some time at Barrington Park that night, which Johnson said he claimed he was there for several hours. Was that the time he spent beating his family to death? Um, but there, Cindy had a timeline, and I can't remember all of it, but I know he did not have a chance to be there during the time that they had to have been killed because at 3 something, somebody was still alive. One of the things John B. Johnson said, and this was from the documentary, God gave me a gift. That gift was to be able to take a case to court and try it. At one time in my life, I wanted to be a Baptist preacher, but Vietnam interfered with that. Now I consider myself to be directed by God to this line of work and basically do my preaching in front of a jury. The one thing that the judge put on in the charge to the jury if Guy was knowingly involved. Well, the whole time Matt Doran said before, during, he was satisfied Guy did this. He knew Guy did it. He knew Guy did it alone, and he knew absolutely how he did it. yet the judge threw in there or was knowingly involved. Uh, I don't think that should have been allowed. Um, the foreman, his thing was, Guy should have had an alibi. And it's not up to Guy to prove that he had an alibi. They are supposed to prove that he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's so much reasonable doubt in this. None of the reporters could believe that he was found guilty. It just, they were flabbergasted. Um, but the foreman said he was very upset that Guy didn't have a good alibi. Through prayer, he prepared himself to go to the next stage. The judge and magistrate, he's very clear. The Bible says you reap what you sow more than you sow later than you sow. Um, 32 juror wanted to know how Guy knew they were beat to death if he was not the one that beat them to death. There again. And he also said he felt like something was taken from them, the death penalty off. Well, neither side wanted to try this case again. Neither side wanted a hung jury. Um, so that is the reason they took the death penalty off and they threw juror 152 out because he had been in law enforcement. I forget which law enforcement actually he was in for many years, and he said that he couldn't find him guilty because they had no evidence. So they were very angry with him and ended up getting rid of him. So one thing the foreman said, he could follow the law. The death penalty was on the table. If they were judging whether the police did their job, it would be okay. But if the police did not do their job and did not test all the evidence, how can you be willing to find somebody guilty if all the evidence was not tested or collected? That makes no sense to me. Um, and basically, that's mostly what I have looked at this morning. I know before the trial, when I got down there, I was not allowed to see him from the 29th till the 4th, I believe it was, 3rd. But Alvin, his sister, got to see Guy, but I was not allowed to see him. Uh, she kept quizzing me about what I was thinking. Was I going to set up a legal defense? Uh, what did I think about it? And all. And then after this happened, she informed me that Byron, who was the baby that was beat and was who had to learn how to function again, he was able to testify now. She was telling me he could testify, trying to frighten me. Um, this was just a setup. I just, there's no doubt in my mind this was a setup in that board's mind. They had recently been got a kid killed in that community, and they took a lot of flack because they couldn't find that kid, and he was in a trash bag close to his home where he lived, and they took a lot of flack for that. And two, Guy was told they were tired of paying overtime. They couldn't afford it. So Guy was going to go down for this. And when Guy said that they couldn't because they didn't have no evidence, and Guy was told they would appoint it if they had. And I think that's exactly what they tried to do. And basically, that's all I can think of right this minute.
Thank you, Miss Jean. That's amazing. You did brilliant.
Yes, she done very good.
Absolutely amazing. I know some people have asked on the group about doing fundraising to get Guy a new attorney. I know that's obviously something we can't do. Are you able to just explain to everybody why we can't do any fundraising?
Well, if any fundraising is done, that knocks his attorney off. This attorney is his appeal attorney that was put on this case. Actually, I personally I don't like him, but
Oh,
apparently he to be a good attorney, and I don't care whether I like you or not if you know what you're doing.
yeah,
He sued some other people that he had helped get out of prison that was, and nobody would understand that because they don't know the people involved, but I did. But I think he's an all right attorney. He has to go through the ropes, though. You have to go through the steps, and this was the first step. Actually, he told Guy, even though Guy was disappointed when I talked to him about it being denied, he told Guy initially that Scarlett would deny this the first time, but he thought it would be
yeah,
thrown out chain. But you have to go up the chain. You have to go from A to B to C to D. You can't go from A to D or whatever. But if we do any fundraising and all, and there is nothing you can do that is not found, that's on the internet somewhere. If we do any
mm,
fundraising, that lawyer will be taken off. It is very expensive to get an attorney. When I was trying to find an attorney, I was quoted $500,000 to
Wow.
just initially take the case. This was not a full fee. This was just to get him to take it. Um, and because I could not guarantee that much money, he would not take the case. This was in the beginning, but then I have been told
yeah,
by that you cannot um, collect money if you have a court appointed appeal attorney, and this appeal attorney has to go through the steps. Now, once he goes through all the steps, if it gets denied, then we can go somewhere else. Maybe one of the innocent projects would take it on. We've talked to some of them, however, they don't want to take it on until the appeal process is run out.
yep.
So, so it looks like we're stuck.
Mm.
And it's 30 days, isn't it, that they have to respond to um, it being denied. They've got 30 days to.
I'm not sure about that because I did not see a full thing. I don't know why it was denied. I'm kind of curious about that myself. Even
Cindy's
though
got
I
all of that information.
applied, I was kind of anxious to see that. But that's normally what they do. Each side has 30 days to reply.
Yeah,
That was when we had the hearing for the trial. The defense had 30 days, the prosecution had 30 days, and the judge had a year and a half.
Miss Jean, do you have? Did Cindy get a chance to send you that order?
She hasn't, no, she hasn't
Okay.
sent me.
Okay. Well, I know she's really been busy this morning, and she will
I,
get that to you. Um,
actually,
somebody was asking a question about the cell phone. And all it states in here is that Michelle Toller's cell phone was found in the car covered with blood, which was later determined to be the blood of Joe West. And that's
um,
all it says about the cell phone.
hold on, I've got the time that calls were made. Guy did have the cell phone. He couldn't find the phone in the house because, as John B. Johnson said, the house was a hog pen. And I know myself, if I take the phone somewhere else in the house, I have trouble finding it if I don't remember where I laid it down. But hold on.
Okay, Cindy has text some stuff on here. Reason one for the appeal: not only did the court find the evidence against Heinze to be legally sufficient under the Jackson versus Virginia setting as the 13th juror, the court further concludes that the jury's verdict was not contrary to the law or the evidence and was not decidedly and strongly against the weight of the evidence as presented at trial Accordingly, Heinz motion for new trial on these bases is hereby denied.
Right. I'd have to read that. I can't. I had to look at something to pretty much comprehend and absorb
Okay,
it.
we will send you those copies, Miss Jean.
However, during the last hearing I went to, which was the hearing for the appeal for the new trial, one of her comments were Guy had agreed not to bring this up, throwing that juror off the case. Uh, he had agreed not to bring this up in an appeal, which that tells me that she knows that they did the wrong thing. Now, what's
Yeah.
worded on there?
Right.
But phone calls was made on Michelle's Toller's phone at 3:45 and 3:48, and they did not
3:45.
even
Okay.
3:48, and there was a
Okay.
phone call from landline at 2:16. Okay, the reason Guy had this phone in the car was he said he couldn't find the house phone, and he picked that up and was going to call, but then he got Miss Orlinsky to call.
Okay. Okay. Wanted to verify that.
I didn't
Did
know whose blood.
has anybody got any questions that they want to phone in with from what you've heard so far, or any other questions you want to ask? You can type them or call in. It'd be brilliant if somebody wants to call in. Just from what you've heard so far. Cindy's put, hold on, anyway, I can restart this podcast. Right, okay. You do, everyone would probably have to join again, would they?
Well, she says she can restart it, but I don't know if we'll lose everybody. If you do, everyone would have to join
Everyone can
again, I would
rejoin.
think.
Yeah. I think we need Cindy on so that she can go through the
Yes, we definitely
appeal
need
being
Cindy for
denied.
this. Yeah, for this order here, because she understands it a lot better than I do.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
So should
And
we?
yeah, and we don't want to mislead anybody here.
That's right. So should we get Cindy to end the podcast and then do another one, and everyone can just jump back onto the new one then?
Yes, let's do that and see if we can get her on here.
Brilliant.
Or she can just upload this one to, like she did the other one.
Pardon?
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions, they can then phone in and ask.